Hi there, welcome to the Web Wiz. I'm Eitan, and today we're going to be talking about one of the most annoying things that you can encounter as a developer, and that is this huge CORS error behind me. We're going to be talking about what CORS is, why it exists, and two ways that you can get around it as a developer. So if you want to learn all about that and more, we're about to get started. But before we do that, this is the first video on this channel. So if you want to give a little bit of encouragement, don't forget to give a big thumbs up and subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss the future videos. And without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so before we talk about solutions to the CORS issue, let's first gain a deeper understanding of what CORS actually is and why it's happening to us. So here I am on the MDN web docs, and as you can see, CORS actually stands for Cross-Origin Resource Sharing. So let me explain that. Cross-origin, so two origins or two domains. Resource sharing is making requests and sending data between two domains, essentially. And here we have a pretty cool diagram. So you can see here, for example, if this is domain A, what we see over here, this web page that you've loaded, this HTML, and you're making requests to a server, and your endpoint is also domain A, then you will be able to fetch resources without any limitations. But if you are trying to get stuff from domain B, so another server that's being served from another domain, another endpoint, then you might encounter some CORS issues if the server isn't built in a way to allow this cross-origin resource sharing. And it's important to understand that this is a restriction that is imposed by the browser. And that's also going to be relevant when we talk about solutions. But again, before we talk about solutions, I built a small demonstration which really highlights the problem. So let's hop in and take a look at that. In order to demonstrate CORS to you, I have created this very, very simple Express server. And when I say I mean mostly ChatGPT. And what this server does, I'm assuming you have some basic knowledge of how a server is built and possibly how to do so with Express. But if not, I'll try and give you the gist of it. Essentially, this server does two things. One is it serves HTML from the homepage endpoint. Okay, so if you were to navigate just to the homepage of this domain, then it will serve index.html, and I'll be showing you in a moment what that HTML contains. It's pretty boring. And I've also created another endpoint which simulates more of an API endpoint for fetching data, and it just sends over this mock data that you see right over here. And I've launched this server on a service called render.com. I mean, technically you could launch this wherever you want. Just they have some very easy to use free tiers and it connects to GitHub and it's super simple. They're not sponsoring this video in any way. I just really like to use that tool. But you could deploy a server at the hosting service of your choice. And this essentially is in order to simulate a server that you are trying to utilize, an API that you're trying to utilize, and you're possibly hitting that CORS error. Okay, and I'm going to demonstrate to you two situations with this server, one where we don't get CORS and one where we do get CORS, and I think that that will really highlight what essentially causes CORS and what we're going to have to do in order to deal with CORS. Okay, so here we are on the HTML page that is being served from the server that I just created. And as you can see, it says here, I love CORS, even though I don't think there's a developer on earth that would actually say that. And what I'm going to do now is try and fetch the data endpoint of my server from this web page, okay, from within the browser on this web page. So what I'm going to do over here, I'm just here inside of the console. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to log a fetch request to the server. So I'm going to say here console.log. And as you can see here, I've already done this once before. So I'm just going to go ahead and click tab. Okay, so this is a very simple fetch request to the server and the data endpoint. Okay, so this is what's supposed to serve us that mock data. And I'm making this request from the same origin. Okay, so I'm currently on the web page that's being served from this same domain, and I'm making a request to this same domain. So I'm just going to go ahead and click enter. And you can see here that we have successfully gotten a response, and it's a response with status 200. And if I was to store this response in a variable and then go ahead and extrapolate the JSON body from it, I would be able to access the data. So here we see that when I'm making a request from the same origin, okay, to my server, I encounter no issue. Okay, so now let's try and do the same thing, but from a different origin. So I'm going to go over here now to Wikipedia. Okay, wikipedia.com, and this is not the same origin. So now this web page is being served by Wikipedia, by the Wikipedia server and Wikipedia domain, whereas I am trying to access my data, my endpoint, which is on a completely different server, and I can't even read what it is. It's CORS.onrender.com. Okay, that's the domain that I'm trying to access. So let's essentially make the same request over here inside of the console of a Wikipedia page. So I'm just going to start typing out again, console.log. And again, here I have the same exact request that I made before. So I'm just going to go ahead and click tab. And you can see here, I'm trying to fetch the same data endpoint that we managed to fetch successfully from the previous page here on Wikipedia. So let me just go ahead and hit enter. And as you can see, we have successfully encountered a CORS issue. Okay, so I'm trying to essentially make a request from a different origin to my server, and that is getting blocked and it is unsuccessful. And now let's talk a little bit about why this CORS thing exists, and then we'll talk about how we can potentially circumvent or prevent this CORS issue. So why does CORS exist? CORS is essentially a security feature. And knowing that, I hopped on the internet to try and figure out why this security feature exists and what essentially it is trying to protect us from. And I've been reading a lot here on Reddit, which is pretty much the only thing you can access from Google nowadays. And from my understanding, there are many different understandings of what this actual security feature is meant for, but generally there is a consensus that it is related to cookies. And I'm going to demonstrate this, but before I do, it's important to understand that this security feature is implemented on the browser side. So CORS is a security feature to protect the client, to protect the browser, and it's implemented by the browser, and it's not meant to be protecting the server, even though sometimes the solution can be making a change on the server, which we'll get to and might make things seem complicated for a moment, but hopefully all these preliminary explanations will help clear that up. So I've created another demonstration, and if you'll take a look here at the server, I've made a slight adjustment, and I've added in this middleware, this cookie parser. And essentially what it does is it will log the cookies from any request that we make to the server. So I've already deployed this change, and now I'm going to hop over to our browser and I'm going to add some cookies to the request. So back here inside of the browser, we have our lovely I Love CORS HTML page loaded. And what I'm going to be doing is setting some cookies for this page. Before I do that, just a brief recap of cookies. Cookies are essentially a form of storage that can store information that is automatically attached to a request to a domain for which the cookies were stored. And that's a very key point here when we're talking about CORS. And they're often used for storing things related to authentication. So for example, if you log into a website, the server will then send you a very long token, which is stored as a cookie, which can later be used for requests to the server without having to always put in your email and password and re-authenticate yourself every single time you want to make a request. So that is essentially what cookies are and what they're used for. And I can set a cookie really simply here just by going document.cookie. And let's set a cookie that is monster, and I'll say C is for cookie. Okay, I hope you get the reference. And if I just click enter right over here, then essentially I set this cookie. And we can find our cookies if we go over here to application, right up here on top. And you can see here that we have the cookies for this specific domain. Okay, that's an important thing, for this specific domain. And here we have C is for cookie. Okay, so that is essentially how we store a cookie and how you can view the cookie here within the application. So now that we have stored the cookie, whenever I make a request to this domain, okay, it will send that cookie along with the request. So let's, for example, just refresh this page. And as you can see, the cookie is persistent and it stays even though I'm refreshing the page. And if we take a look here at the server logs, okay, so these are logs of the onrender.com of the server that I deployed. And you can see here that we have the log that I put in for the cookies, and you can see C is for cookie, C is for cookie, C is for cookie. And these would also be sent if I made a request using the data endpoint. So let's go ahead and demonstrate that. So I'll go here back to console, and I'll put in the same console.log and the same exact thing that we did before. Okay, so the same exact request. And I'm going to make that request, and we got response back okay. And if we go ahead and check out the logs here, then you can see that we got another log here for C is for cookie. So whether I'm making a request that loads the HTML page or I'm making a request to the data endpoint, those cookies are always sent. And this is where the vulnerability comes in, because these cookies are stored in the browser even as I navigate to other websites. And if I was to make a request to this server from a website that doesn't belong to the server, then the cookies would still be sent along. And since these cookies can sometimes be storing sensitive information, potentially a hacker could build a page that looks very similar to the page that you want to be on and make a request to the server. It would send along the cookies, and essentially they can fool you into making certain changes to your account that you wouldn't want to do. Again, it's not that they are sending your token to their own server, but rather they are manipulating you inside of your own browser to send the cookies to the server that you intended, but maybe in a way that you did not intend. Okay, so this is where the security vulnerability comes in. And I'm going to highlight this again as we make requests to a server that does allow this kind of cross-origin request. So now we are pretty much done explaining what CORS is, why it exists, and now let's talk about how we can potentially circumvent or solve this error when it comes up and we're trying to dev something and it's just not working. The key to solving CORS lies in the understanding that CORS is a protection implemented by the browser. It is true that you can make changes on the server that is receiving the request, and we'll talk about that in a moment, that will essentially prevent the cores from firing inside of the browser, but it's still not a protection that is meant to protect your server. Okay, it's meant to protect the client, it's meant to protect the person who's using the browser. And with that understanding, there are essentially two ways that we can circumvent or prevent this CORS error from firing up. One is to make the request from a server, and the other is to essentially put the allow something something origins, I'll show you the exact header in a moment, inside of the server that is receiving the request. Okay, so again, one is make the request from a server, two, make a certain alteration to the server receiving the request. So let's focus for now on number one. In order to demonstrate number one, I have created a second server called another server here, and I am going to deploy this server locally. Okay, I'm not going to deploy it to the web, and basically all this server does is that it fetches that same endpoint, that same data endpoint that we were trying to fetch from within the browser. So let's go ahead and deploy that. So I'm going to just go down here into the terminal, and I will say node another server.js. And now it is running on localhost 3000. Okay, and there's nothing to check there because it's not serving any HTML, so we won't see anything there. But you can see here that it has logged essentially the data from the endpoint. So we've successfully made a request to this deployed server. So these are two different servers. One's running locally on my device, and the other one is on the web, and they are communicating with no issues, and there's no CORS problem, even though they are two separate servers on two separate domains. Okay, so again, because CORS is a client side, a browser protection, if you are making the request from a server, you will never hit any CORS issue. You may hit other restrictions that are built into the server that require some kind of authentication or API key or something like that, but you definitely will not be hitting a CORS issue. So if you're hitting a CORS problem, chances are you are trying to make that request from within the browser, and you should be trying to make the request from your server. The second way to get around CORS lies in this access control allow origin header. And this method is really only possible for you if you are also in control of the server that you're making a request to. So if you're using some third-party API, then you can stop here because this is not going to help you, and you'll have to use method one, which is using a server to make the request. If you are developing the API yourself and you're testing it out within your application, then this will be relevant to you. And essentially by making this change to the server, you can prevent the CORS issue. So let me hop back into our server here, our server code, and you'll see here that I have added in some middleware. And essentially this middleware sets a header for the response, and it sets this access control allow origin header. And here you can see that I put a star, which essentially means allow all origins. Okay, so what this means is that when a request is checking to see if we are allowed to make the request across origins, across domains, my server will respond and say, yes, it's okay for all domains. Okay, this is something that's called a pre-flight request. I don't want to get into it too deeply, but essentially what this will do, if I put a star here and I deploy this, which I already did, then I will be able to make requests to the server from any domain. So back in Wikipedia, I am going to attempt to make the same request that we tried to make before to the data endpoint. So I'm just going to go over here and do console.log, and I'm just going to hit tab here. Okay, so this is the same request that we made before, and we hit that CORS error. Okay, so the same exact one. And I'm just going to go ahead and hit enter. And you can see here that we did get back a response this time. So it was status 200. And you might notice here that the type is CORS. So it is acknowledging that this is still a cross-origin request. But since my server said, okay, we're okay with getting requests that are cross-origin, my browser was, okay, if the server's okay with it, then I'm okay with it too, and allowed this to go through and the actual request to be made. Okay, so there are ways to allow this from the server. And if you don't want to allow CORS for all domains, because it is a certain security vulnerability for your application or the use of your API, because even though CORS is meant to protect the client, you as the API provider also want to protect the client because essentially they're the people using your service and you don't want to expose them to vulnerabilities. So you can specify the domains that you want to give people access to, or domains essentially that you want to allow to access your server by specifying them over here. So instead of a star, I can specify the actual domain that I want to allow access to. So for example, here, I can specify that it is, let's say HTTPS wikipedia.org. Okay, so this will allow access only to Wikipedia and not to any domain. I can also allow access to several domains by applying this header multiple times. You can also build out a function with an array that will apply it for all of the different domains that you want. So for example, here, I want google.com as well. It's important to note that there are also, NPM packages that you can install into your server if you're using Express that kind of streamline these things, such as CORS. But since that's very, very, platform and framework specific, I'm not going to get into it too much. It's important mostly to understand the principle of access control allow origin. So now we've managed to circumvent CORS by making a certain change to our server and allowing all domains to send requests. But I want to point out one thing that changes here, and it might be important if your server needs the credentials or the cookies to be sent over. So if we take a look here at the logs from the recent request that we made, you'll notice that we're not getting the cookies anymore. Okay, so here we had monster C is for cookie, and here these are all the requests that were made from Wikipedia, and we're not getting the cookies even though they are associated with the domain that we're making the request to. And the reason for that is because these security measures are pretty smart, and they understand that if you're making a request that is cross-origin, then you are essentially vulnerable to this type of attack by kind of taking advantage of these cookies, and they don't automatically send the cookies along with the fetch request if it's a CORS request. In order to get the cookies sent, we will have to make some changes. And if we take a look here, then we can see here that we have to essentially attach this credentials include to the request. In addition to that, we are going to have to set access control allow credentials to true. And this is something that is only going to work if we have not utilized the star in the access control allow origins. So essentially, if you are allowing requests from any domain, then you won't be able to receive cookies along with those requests. So if your server requires cookies, then you will need to specify certain domains that can make requests to that server. So let's do a short demonstration of what this looks like. Back here on our Wikipedia page, let's now try and make the fetch request with the credentials include. So let's go over here and I'll do again console.log and let's pull up our usual fetch request over here. But in addition to the URL, I will add credentials and include. Okay, so essentially it's just an object with the property credentials and the value include as a string. And I'm going to go ahead and click enter. And now we can see that we have CORS again. So CORS is back and I haven't made any change to the server. And the reason that we're getting this CORS error is specified over here, and it's what I just explained to you before. So access control allow origin header in the response must not be wildcard star when the request credentials mode is include. Okay, so the people who created this stuff are pretty smart and they're really trying to protect you from multiple angles. So let me go ahead and make a change to the server. So instead of allowing wildcard, I am going to allow Wikipedia. So back inside of our server, you'll see that I've made two changes here. One is that I've changed the access control allow origin specifically to Wikipedia. Okay, so it's no longer the wildcard, the asterisk, the star. It is specifically that I'm allowing Wikipedia. And the way that you write the domain is important. So it's www.wikipedia and not just Wikipedia. I mean, depends on the domain that you're using, but that needs to match. And in terms of the access control allow credentials, so that's another thing that I mentioned in the explanation, that we need to set that to true in order to receive the credentials, which is essentially the cookies here. So in this demonstration, cookies and credentials are synonymous, so here you can see that I have set that to true. So now that I've set up those two things and I've redeployed the server, let's head back to Wikipedia. And I'm going to try and make the same request that I made before with the credentials include. So let's go ahead and do console.log. And here I have it here as the first one, so I'm just going to go ahead and hit tab. So the same exact request that we made before with credentials include, and I'm going to go ahead and hit enter, fingers crossed, and we can see here that we got a response. Okay, so we didn't hit the same CORS issue that we hit a moment earlier, but when I head over to the server logs, I notice that we still were not getting the cookie. So even though we set credentials to include in the fetch request and we were allowing origin for Wikipedia and we said allow credentials to true and the request did get through, we still weren't setting the cookies. So I dug a little deeper and as you can see here at the end, I did figure it out because I did manage to send the cookie in the end. So let me show you what additional things need to be set along with the cookie to allow this kind of cross-origin request to take place. So I'm going to head here back into the browser. And I'm going to head here to our site where we set the cookie. Okay. And I'm going to change two things here in the cookies settings. And these are things that you can also apply when you're actually setting the cookie. But I'm just going to do it here inside of the dev tools because I've already have the cookie in place and it'll just be a little more streamlined. So the first thing is I'm going to set this cookie to secure, which determines what kind of networks it can be sent across. I'm not going to dive into it too deeply because this isn't a video about cookies in the end of the day. Let me know in the comments if you do want a video about specifically about cookies. And here I'm going to set same site. Okay, that's what we have right over here. So I set secure to checked. Okay, that's the first thing. And same site, I'm going to set to none. Okay, so now that I've set these two things, let's head back over to Wikipedia, where I'm going to be making this request from. And if we go here into application for Wikipedia, you can see that the changes that I made to the cookie on our site also apply here as well now. Okay, so any changes that I make to a cookie are throughout the entire browser, regardless of what tab you're in. And now let's try and make that request again. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do the console.log, and I'm going to use one of these with our credentials include. Okay, so this is our request that we were trying to make before. And I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. And this you can ignore. So we got back a response. Okay, everything is looking nice and dandy. And I'm going to head over here back into our logs, and you can see here that I finally managed to pass in the cookies. So what does this teach us? It teaches us that even if you do circumvent CORS, it's still pretty hard to put yourself in a situation where you're accidentally allowing people to send cookies that they shouldn't be sending. So there are many layers of protection in place here. It is important to note, though, that I am specifically using a Chrome browser. So everything that I demonstrated today is for Chrome. And this is because of that fundamental principle, which I've been mentioning several times, that CORS is a browser protection. It's a client-side protection. So if somebody built a browser theoretically that did not enforce CORS, then you would never have this problem within the browser. Most modern browsers do enforce CORS, and Chrome is one of the most stringent ones. But each browser might handle these things a little differently, so it's important to remember that as you're developing your application. And if you see discrepancies between your own personal experience and what I showed in this video, it may have to do with the fact that you're not using a Chrome browser. With that, I am going to wrap up for today. I hope that you found this video educational and interesting. If you want to see more content like this, there are several ways that you can let me know. One is to give this video a big thumbs up. That way I know you like this and you want to see more like this. You can leave a comment to show your appreciation. I know that that's a big ask. You can also mention other topics that you'd like to see videos for in the web and web development world. And finally, if you really, really, really want to give me a lot of encouragement, you can also go ahead and subscribe to the channel, and then you will definitely know when a new video comes out, and I will see you next time.